The morning sun hammered down on Derek's shoulders as he swung the sledgehammer against the pool's concrete shell. He'd been wanting to do this for 2 years, ever since the pump broke and the repair guy quoted him $8,000. Who needed a pool anyway? A small yard, 2 kids who'd grown up and moved out, and a wife who now spent weekends in yoga classes rather than poolside. Time to reclaim the space. Make it into something useful. A garden, a sitting area. Something that felt like his again instead of this money-devouring monument to a different life. The sledgehammer connected with a satisfying crack. A chunk of concrete the size of a dinner plate exploded outward. "Derek!" He turned. His wife Michelle stood at the sliding glass door, phone pressed to her ear, her face the color of old newspaper. "Yeah? He lowered the sledgehammer. That was Karen from next door. She says you can't take down the pool without her permission." Derek laughed. Actually laughed. "Her permission? Michelle, it's our pool, our yard, our property." Michelle stepped outside, barefoot despite the heat radiating off the patio. "She's coming over. Right now." She sounded furious. He should have known. Karen Hutchinson had lived next door for 16 years, and in that time, she'd managed to make herself a permanent fixture in their lives. Not in a neighborly way, but in the way a splinter works itself deeper under your skin. She complained about their lawn clippings drifting into her garden. She complained about their kids playing basketball on the driveway after 7 p.m. She complained about the pool, actually, saying the pump noise disturbed her morning meditation. Now she was complaining about them taking it down. "Let her be mad," Derek said, turning back to the pool. "It's our property." He raised the sledgehammer again. That's when he heard it. Not just footsteps, but a deliberate, aggressive stride accompanied by the metallic scratch of something being dragged across concrete. Karen came around the corner of the fence. Her gray hair pulled back so tight it seemed to stretch her face. She was 63 but moved like someone half her age, aggressive, purposeful, dangerous in the way that only a woman with a clipboard and a grudge could be. In her hands she held a measuring tape, already extended. "Stop right there," Karen said, not quite yelling but using that voice that made Michelle flinch. "You are not demolishing that pool." Derek didn't lower the sledgehammer. "Last I checked, Karen, this was my property." "Your property?" Karen's laugh was sharp as broken glass. She gestured with the measuring tape like she was about to conduct an orchestra of chaos. "Your property ends here." She pointed to a spot roughly 3 feet into Derek's yard from the fence line that had always separated their 2 properties. "No, it doesn't," Derek said, but something in his chest tightened. He'd never really thought about the exact property line. It was just the fence. The fence had always been there. "Yes, it does." Karen pulled a crumpled piece of paper from her pocket. It looked ancient, yellowed at the edges, covered in handwritten notes and coffee stains. "I had my own survey done last month. Same surveyor who did work on the Henderson's place 2 blocks over. He told me something very interesting about our fence line." Michelle had come down to stand beside Derek, close enough that he could feel the tension radiating off her. "Karen, what are you talking about?" "What I'm talking about," Karen said, unfolding the paper with theatrical precision, "is that when the Carlsons originally built this house in 1978, they apparently decided they liked your property better than theirs. Or maybe they just made a mistake. But they built the fence 6 feet onto my land. Which means your pool," she jabbed the measuring tape toward it, "sits almost entirely on my property." The world seemed to tilt slightly. "That's insane," Derek said, but his voice had lost its certainty. The deed says one thing," Karen interrupted, and now there was something else in her voice beneath the anger, something that sounded almost like satisfaction. "But the actual survey, the one that was filed with the county back in 1978, says something different. Apparently, your parents never bothered to check. Neither did you." Michelle made a small sound, almost a whimper. Derek's mind was doing calculations, trying to find the angle, the mistake in Karen's logic. But he'd already felt the shift. The way the earth had moved under his feet. He knew, in that deep way you know bad news, that she was right. "Even if that were true," he said slowly, "which it's not, your option at this point would be to sue. Not to," he gestured vaguely. "To what?" Stand here in the morning and take down my own pool? Karen smiled. It was not a kind smile. That's exactly what I'm going to do. You can't just, I can and I will. Karen extended the measuring tape fully now, showing both of them the numbers. I had the survey done, I have the documentation, and I have already filed a formal property line dispute with the county. Which means, Derek, this pool? Everything past this line? She drew an invisible line through the yard with one perfectly manicured finger. That's mine, and I want it gone. Derek looked at Michelle. Michelle was staring at the pool as if it might suddenly speak, might explain itself, might tell them this wasn't real. You're going to regret this, Derek heard himself say. Karen tilted her head. Her eyes were glittering, and Derek realized with a start that she was enjoying this. She'd been waiting for this. This moment, this confrontation, this victory. She'd been waiting for it for years. No, Karen said quietly, but I think you might. She turned and walked back toward her house, still holding the measuring tape. Still smiling. Derek stood in the yard with the sledgehammer in his hands, the morning sun now feeling less like warmth and more like pressure. In the distance, he could hear the sound of Karen's sliding glass door closing. Michelle's hand found his. What just happened? She whispered. Derek looked down at the sledgehammer, then at the pool, then at the place where Karen had drawn an invisible line through his world. I have no idea, he said. But I think we just became enemies. Derek sat at the kitchen table with his laptop open, the county records glowing back at him like an accusation. It was past midnight. Michelle had gone to bed 2 hours ago, but he couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop searching. The numbers on the screen blurred together, coordinates, measurements, lot numbers, all of it designed to describe something as simple as where one person's world ended and another's began. The survey Karen had shown him was real. He'd driven to the county assessor's office that afternoon while Michelle stayed home, sick with anxiety. He'd paid $30 to print the official documents, black and white, stamped and dated, July 15, 1978. The original survey, filed right after his parents bought the house. The property line curved in a way Derek had never noticed. Or rather, he'd noticed it. The way you notice your own face in the mirror every day without really seeing it. The fence had always been there. His parents had never mentioned anything unusual about the property. It had simply existed as the natural boundary between his world and Karen's, except it hadn't been. According to the original survey, the actual property line was supposed to run straight, a clean geometric division. But somewhere between 1978 and now, the fence had migrated, drifted 6 feet onto Karen's land like a ship with a broken compass. And the pool, Jesus the pool, had been built right into the disputed zone in 1995 when Derek was 14 years old. His father had hired contractors. There had been a party when it was finished. Derek remembered the smell of chlorine and the sound of his mother laughing. All of it. Apparently on someone else's property. He typed Karen's name into the property database, scrolling through her ownership history. She'd bought the house in 2009, right after her divorce. Derek remembered that. Remembered the moving trucks, the awkward introduction, the beginning of their particular brand of neighborly tension. For 13 years, they'd coexisted in this false geography, and Karen had apparently spent at least some of that time figuring out that the geography was false. His phone buzzed. A text from his brother Tom, who lived in Sacramento. Mom called me. Is it true? About the property line? Derek stared at the message. How fast did bad news travel? His mother lived in Tucson now, in a retirement community where she played bridge 3 times a week and had supposedly left their old life behind. Apparently not fast enough to escape it. He typed back, looks like it. How did she find out? The response came immediately, which meant Tom was also awake and also panicking. She called Karen, direct, asked her to clarify what she meant about our yard. Derek felt something twist in his stomach. His mother had called Karen. Of course she had. His mother was the kind of person who tried to solve problems by confronting them head-on, by reasoning with the other party, by appealing to shared humanity. It had worked for her in life, mostly, but Derek had a feeling it wouldn't work with Karen. Another text from Tom. Mom says she never knew about the survey. Dad apparently found out about the discrepancy after he bought the place, but decided it wasn't worth the hassle to fix. He just let it go for 45 years. Derek closed his eyes. His father, who died 8 years ago, had apparently known that their property was built on a lie and had decided that inertia was preferable to conflict. Classic dad. Don't make waves. Don't draw attention. Eventually, everyone forgets, except Karen hadn't forgotten. Or rather, Karen had remembered, had deliberately investigated, had paid for a survey, had filed documentation. Derek opened a new browser tab and searched for property line disputes in California. The results made him feel like he was looking at a map of a war zone. Neighbors suing neighbors over inches of land. Decades-long feuds. One case where a man had built a spite fence on his property line specifically to block his neighbor's view. Another where someone had planted a row of trees on disputed land, and the legal battle had lasted 7 years. The law, Derek learned, was not kind to people who let things slide. If someone occupied land openly and without permission for a long enough time, they might be able to claim it through adverse possession. But that required the original owner to not object. Karen had objected. She'd gotten a survey. She'd filed paperwork. She'd made it official. Derek had done nothing except swing a sledgehammer at a pool that apparently wasn't fully his. He heard footsteps on the stairs. Michelle appeared in the kitchen doorway, wrapped in the blue bathrobe she'd had for years, her face puffy with interrupted sleep. "You're still up," she said. It wasn't a question. Couldn't sleep. She came over and looked at the screen, at the maps and measurements and legal documents spread across his laptop. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then, "How bad is it?" "Bad," Derek said. "It's bad. The fence is in the wrong place. Has been for 45 years. The pool sits mostly on her property. She's filed a dispute, which means she's made it official, which means we can't just ignore it. So what do we do?" Derek leaned back in his chair. "I think we need a lawyer." Michelle flinched. "How much will that cost?" "I don't know." "A lot." Derek ran his hands through his hair. They'd been doing okay, not rich, but comfortable. 2 salaries the house almost paid off, retirement accounts that were growing the way retirement accounts were supposed to. But legal fees, property disputes, these things had a way of devouring money like the pool had devouring electricity for the past 23 years. "We should call your mom," Michelle said. "She might know something." "She might have. Mom doesn't know anything. She found out the same time we did, probably. But your dad might have kept records. Something that explains what? That he knew about this and did nothing?" Derek's voice came out harsher than he intended. "That he let this problem sit for decades so that I could inherit it instead of dealing with it myself?" Michelle sat down across from him. In the harsh light of the kitchen, she looked older than she had that morning, before Karen showed up with her measuring tape. "We'll figure it out," she said, but it sounded like something she was trying to convince herself of. Derek's phone buzzed again. "Tom, Mom wants to know if you've talked to a lawyer yet." "She says she'll help with costs." Derek texted back, "Not yet. First thing Monday," but it was already Saturday morning. Saturday night was when Karen would, according to her, begin removing the pool. Derek had assumed she was bluffing, but now he wasn't sure. Karen seemed like the kind of person who didn't bluff. He stood up abruptly. "I'm going to go look at it again." "The property line. In daylight? At—" Michelle checked her phone. "It's almost 1 in the morning, Derek." "I know. You should sleep." "I can't." But he didn't go outside. Instead, he sat back down and opened another browser tab. This time, he searched for Karen Hutchinson. The results were sparse. A few LinkedIn profiles for people with her name who weren't her. A mention in a local news article from 2015 about a community board meeting on zoning. A picture in a town newsletter from 2019, where she was identified as having volunteered for the restoration of the community garden. Karen, who had apparently spent 15 years in subtle, patient preparation for this exact moment. Derek kept scrolling, kept digging, kept searching for something, anything that would tell him who Karen really was. What motivated her? Whether there was any possible angle of approach that might make her reconsider. What he found instead was a woman he didn't recognize at all. Article from 2019 mentioned that Karen had devoted countless hours to helping revitalize the community space after years of neglect. A quote from the parks director called her an invaluable partner in making our neighborhood beautiful community garden. Karen had been the one planting things in that disputed space all along. The expensive landscaping that lined their shared fence, the roses and lavender and climbing jasmine that had made Derek's yard smell like a perfume counter every spring and summer. He'd never really thought about it. Hadn't cared where she got the inspiration or the energy. But now he realized something. Karen had been beautifying that space. Their space. The space that Derek owned and she was about to reclaim. It was nearly 2 a.m. when Derek finally closed his laptop. He'd learned nothing useful. Nothing that would help him or hurt her, or change the fundamental fact that they were now locked in something that would take lawyers and money and time to untangle. He went upstairs and found Michelle still awake, staring at the ceiling. "Can't sleep either?" he asked. "Kept thinking about the pool," she said. "About the kids playing in it when they were little. About that 4th of July party where your boss fell in fully clothed.
Remember?
Yeah. It all feels like it happened in someone else's yard now." Derek got into bed beside his wife. Through the window, he could see the silhouette of the fence that was in the wrong place, that had been in the wrong place for longer than either of them had lived in this house. "Monday," he said. "First thing Monday, I'm calling a lawyer." But he was already thinking about Sunday, about what Karen might do when the sun went down and there was no one watching. He was already thinking about defense. To be continued. Sunday morning arrived with the kind of heat that made the air shimmer above the asphalt. Derek woke before dawn, his t-shirt soaked with sweat, his mind already racing through worst-case scenarios. He'd barely slept, his dreams populated with surveyors and lawyers and Karen's face, always smiling that terrible smile. The backyard looked different in the early light, smaller somehow, or perhaps just more vulnerable. The pool sat there like a defiant monument to his family's ignorance, its empty basin already collecting dead leaves and the small debris of a life being unmade. Derek had turned off the pump 2 days ago, right after Karen's ultimatum. The water had begun to drain almost immediately, receding like a tide going out and not coming back. He stood at the fence line that Karen had drawn with such precision, the invisible boundary she'd made visible. In daylight, with the actual measurements from the county office fresh in his mind, Derek could almost see it now, the point where his property ended and hers began. It ran diagonally through the yard, cutting through the concrete pad where the pool sat, passing just beyond the edge of the patio. Everything on that side of the line was technically hers. "You're up early." Derek turned. His neighbor from 2 houses down, Gary, was jogging past with his golden retriever. They'd never been particularly close, just the kind of neighbors who waved at mailbox distance and occasionally made small talk about lawn care. "Couldn't sleep," Derek said. Gary jogged in place, the dog tugging gently at the leash. "Heard something happened with you and Karen. Something about property lines." Of course he had. In a neighborhood like this, gossip traveled faster than the internet. Derek wondered how many people already knew. How many were already forming opinions? "It's complicated," Derek said. "It usually is with Karen." Gary's expression shifted, became something more serious. "Look, I don't want to get involved, but she's not the type to back down. She's been like that for years. There was an issue with the Hendersons about their tree-dropping leaves in her yard. It went on for 2 years before they finally had it cut down. The tree was on their property," Derek said. "Doesn't matter," Gary said. "Karen doesn't give up. She's got this thing about boundaries, about people respecting lines." He paused, the dog pulling harder now, eager to keep running. "Just saying, you might want to take this seriously." After Gary jogged away, Derek stood alone in his yard again. The morning was already heating up, the sun climbing steadily toward the kind of brutal afternoon heat that made you want to crawl into a basement and never emerge. He went inside and found Michelle making coffee. She looked worse than he felt, her hair uncombed, dark circles under her eyes, wearing the same bathrobe from last night. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked. "Maybe 2 hours. I kept thinking I heard noise outside, like she was already starting." She wouldn't do it in the middle of the night, wouldn't she? Michelle poured coffee with shaking hands. We don't know what she'd do. We don't know her at all, apparently. Derek's phone buzzed. A text from his mother. Spoke with Karen yesterday evening. She seems very certain about her legal position. I apologize for not knowing about the survey issue. Your father should have told us. Should have fixed it. Derek showed the message to Michelle. My mom called her directly. What did she say? She seems very certain, which means Karen didn't budge. Michelle set down her coffee cup hard enough that some sloshed onto the counter. We need to call that lawyer. Right now. It's Sunday, but there might be an emergency line, or it's 6:30 in the morning, so we leave a message. We do something besides sit here waiting for her to destroy our property. She was right. Derek pulled up his laptop and did a search for emergency real estate lawyers in the area. He found one with a 24-hour line, but calling it at 6:30 on a Sunday felt desperate. He left a message anyway, explaining the situation as briefly as possible. Asking for a Monday morning callback, by 8 a.m. they were both dressed and showered, trying to act normal even though nothing felt normal anymore. Michelle made breakfast, eggs and toast that neither of them really wanted. They sat at the kitchen table not talking, just waiting, the way people wait for bad news they know is coming. At 10 a.m., Derek's phone rang. The lawyer, a woman named Susan Chen, had gotten his message and was calling back. Property line disputes are complex, she said, after Derek had explained everything. But you've got some options. The fact that your parents allowed the fence to remain in the wrong position for this long actually helps in some ways. There's a legal concept called acquiescence. Basically, if someone allows a boundary to exist openly for a long period of time without objection, they can lose their right to enforce the legal boundary. So we might win. Derek felt a spark of hope ignite in his chest. Might, Susan emphasized, but only if we can prove several things. First, that the fence was installed with the understanding that it was the legal boundary. Second, that there's been open and obvious use of the disputed area for a long time. Third, that the original property owner, your father, either knew about the discrepancy or should have known about it and chose not to object. He did know, Derek said. My brother just found out that he did. That's actually problematic, Susan said. If he knew and did nothing, then he wasn't being forced into the situation. He was making a choice. That weakens the acquiescence argument. But we might be able to argue that his inaction constituted acceptance of the new boundary, and that you, as his heir, inherited that acceptance. Derek's head was spinning. How much will this cost? I'd want a retainer of $5,000 to start. After that, it depends on how far it goes. If she's willing to settle, maybe another $3,000 to $5,000. If we end up in court, it could be $10,000 or more. After the call ended, Derek sat in silence. $8,000 to $15,000. That was real money. That was vacation plans postponed, retirement contributions reduced, careful budgeting for the next year or two. That was also the price of not losing your home to someone else's property. Call her back, Michelle said. Tell her yes. Derek made the appointment for Monday morning at 9 a.m. Just a consultation at first, but it felt like he was stepping onto a path that would only lead forward, that had momentum now, that couldn't be stopped or redirected. The afternoon dragged on. Derek tried to work on some freelance projects he had pending, but he couldn't concentrate. His eyes kept drifting to the window, to the backyard, to the pool that was slowly draining into the ground. At 4 p.m., he saw movement over the fence. Karen was in her yard. She was carrying something. It looked like a surveyor's stake, the kind with bright orange paint on the end. She was walking the line that divided their properties, marking it methodically, placing stakes every 10 feet or so, creating a visible demarcation where before there had only been the invisible boundary known through documents and maps. She was making it real. Derek went outside. What are you doing? Karen didn't stop. She just kept marking, kept defining, kept making the line impossible to ignore. When she finally turned to face him, her expression was calm, almost peaceful. I'm marking my boundary, she said. That way there's no confusion going forward. You can't just, I can. Karen held up another stake. This is my property. I'm marking it. It's perfectly legal. In fact, I'm being very reasonable. I'm giving you notice. I'm being clear. I'm not sneaking around in the middle of the night doing anything underhanded. We're getting a lawyer, Derek said. Good. Karen smiled. So am I. She turned back to her work, and Derek realized with a sinking feeling that Karen had probably already had a lawyer. Probably had one on retainer since she'd gotten the survey done. This whole thing, the tape measure, the measurements, the righteous anger, it had all been performance. Karen had been prepared. Karen had been ready. Derek had just been defending. You're going to regret this, he said, echoing his words from before. Karen placed another stake and turned to look at him one final time. I've spent 15 years as your neighbor, Derek. 15 years of listening to your pool pump. 15 years of watching you and your family treat my property like it was yours. 15 years of being ignored and disrespected and treated like I was the crazy one for wanting my own property back. Her voice was quiet but burning with something Derek hadn't understood before. Not anger exactly, something deeper. I've already spent 15 years on this. I'm not going to regret protecting what's mine. She went back inside her house. Derek stood in the yard, surrounded by the orange stakes she'd placed, and understood finally what this was. It wasn't a dispute anymore. It was a war, and he'd just realized that he was already losing. That night, he called Susan Chen again. How fast can you move on this? He asked. Fast, she said. But moving fast costs money. Overnight filings, expedited research, that sort of thing. Why? Because I think she's going to escalate. I think she's going to try to remove the pool herself if I don't stop her. Then we need to file an injunction immediately, something to prevent her from taking any action on the disputed property until the dispute is resolved. I can have something ready by first thing Monday morning. Do it, Derek said. After he hung up, he stood at the window and looked out at the orange stakes marking the boundary of his shrinking world. Tomorrow, they would fight. Tonight, he would prepare. Monday morning arrived like a storm front, dark clouds gathering on the horizon, the air thick with the electricity of something about to break. Derek sat in Susan Chen's office at 8:45 a.m., 15 minutes before the scheduled appointment, watching her type furiously on her keyboard while her paralegal made copies of documents that would, hopefully, stop Karen from doing anything else. Susan was in her mid-50s, sharp-eyed and efficient, with the kind of direct manner that made Derek feel like she'd seen this exact situation play out 100 times before, which she probably had. The injunction is strong, she said, not looking up from her screen. It prevents her from removing, demolishing, or altering any structures on the disputed property pending resolution of the boundary dispute. Technically, it also prevents you from doing the same thing, but since you haven't been aggressive in your actions, the court will likely interpret this in your favor. When can you file it? Derek asked. Already done. Electronic filing went through at 7 this morning. The judge should review it today. We'll likely have an emergency hearing within 48 hours. Michelle, sitting beside Derek, squeezed his hand. She'd taken a personal day from work. Couldn't concentrate, she'd told her boss, and it was true. Derek had done the same. They couldn't afford to miss what came next. What should we expect from the hearing? Derek asked. Karen will argue that she's entitled to her property and that preventing her from removing structures on it is a violation of her property rights. We'll argue that the boundary itself is in dispute and that maintaining the status quo is necessary while we resolve the matter. The judge will decide whether to keep the injunction in place, modify it, or dismiss it. And if she dismisses it, Susan finally looked at him. Then you have a problem. Then Karen can start removing the pool whenever she wants. They left the office at 9:30 a.m. Derek's phone buzzed as they were walking to the car. A text from his mother. Karen called me again. She's very upset. She says you're trying to prevent her from removing structures on her own property. Is that true? Derek didn't respond. What could he say? That his mother's ex-neighbor was now Karen's ally in this fight, armed with sympathy for Karen's position and anger at Derek's father for letting this situation develop in the first place. By noon, Derek's email was filling up with messages from his lawyer. The first was a copy of the injunction she'd filed. The second was a response from Karen's attorney, a man named Douglas Metz from a firm downtown that specialized in real estate disputes. My client denies the characterization of this matter as a dispute. The The property boundary is well established in the county records. The only dispute is whether my client will be forced to wait for a dilatory legal process before reclaiming what is rightfully hers. We intend to argue for immediate dissolution of any temporary restraining order and look forward to presenting our position to the court. Dilatory. Deliberately slow. Derek had to look it up. It meant Karen's lawyer was already accusing him of stalling tactics. The emergency hearing was scheduled for Wednesday at 2 p.m., 2 days away. 48 hours that stretched out like a sentence being read slowly, each minute heavy with consequence. Tuesday passed in a blur of preparation. Susan had Derek and Michelle sign a stack of documents, affidavits, authorizations, releases. She took a copy of the original survey from 1978 and the newer one that Karen had commissioned, comparing them meticulously, making notes, building a case. The key, she explained, is going to be something called the agreed boundary doctrine. It's a legal principle that says if two property owners have acquiesced to a boundary line for a long enough period, and we're talking 20 years minimum, but 45 is even better, then that boundary becomes the legal boundary, regardless of what the original documents say. So we could actually win this? Derek asked. We could, but it's not certain. It depends on the judge, on how persuasive Karen's argument is that your father knew about the problem and did nothing, and on our ability to prove that there was genuine acquiescence, rather than mere ignorance. Wednesday arrived with agonizing slowness. Derek barely ate breakfast. Michelle had thrown up twice from anxiety. They drove downtown in near silence, parked in a courthouse garage that smelled like oil and desperation, and took the elevator to the second floor where family disputes and property battles played out in fluorescent-lit rooms every single day. The courtroom was smaller than Derek expected, more intimate. Judge Patricia Morrison sat behind a raised desk, a woman in her 60s with reading glasses on a chain and an expression that suggested she'd seen every possible variation of human conflict and had grown immune to all of it. Karen was already there, sitting at a table beside Douglas Metz. She was dressed differently than Derek had ever seen her. A gray suit, her hair perfect, her posture rigid. She looked like someone playing the role of reasonable property owner defending her rights, and she looked, Derek had to admit, very convincing. Susan squeezed Derek's arm as they took their seats at the opposite table. "Let me do the talking," she whispered. Judge Morrison looked up from the papers in front of her. "This is the matter of the emergency TRO regarding the disputed property boundary on Maple Street. Ms. Chen, you filed the temporary restraining order. Make your argument." Susan stood. She was calm, measured, presenting the facts with the precision of someone laying out the pieces of a puzzle. She talked about acquiescence. She talked about 45 years of open and obvious use of the fence line as the boundary. She talked about Derek's father's understanding of the situation and the inference that acceptance of the existing boundary could be inherited by his son. The fundamental principle, Susan concluded, is that moving property lines through litigation should be a careful, deliberate process. Immediate removal of structures would change the facts on the ground and make this case impossible to fairly adjudicate. We're asking for the temporary restraining order to remain in place during the litigation. Judge Morrison nodded, made a note, then looked at Douglas Metz. Your response? Metz was older than Susan, with the bearing of someone who'd been arguing cases since before Derek was born. He stood slowly, letting the weight of experience announce itself through his very posture. The injunction Your Honor is being asked to enforce is a remarkable overreach, he began. My client has discovered that her property has been occupied by her neighbor's structure for many years. She is simply asking for the right to remove that structure. The law is clear. Property owners have the right to possess and control their own land. To prevent my client from exercising this fundamental right would itself be an injustice. He paused, letting his words settle. Furthermore, Your Honor, the concept of acquiescence requires that both parties understood they were accepting a boundary. The evidence shows that Mr. Derek's father may have known about the survey discrepancy, but Derek himself almost certainly did not. He inherited property with a pool already in place. He cannot be said to have acquiesced to anything. He simply lived in his childhood home in the way children do, unaware of the technical details of property boundaries. To punish him for his father's inaction would be unjust. The judge looked at both lawyers. I'm going to need to hear testimony. What's the availability of the principal parties and the surveyor? Over the next hour, Derek found himself on the witness stand, being questioned by both Susan and Metz. Susan asked him when he'd become aware of the property boundary issue. When had he known? When should he have known? What had he understood about the pool's location? Derek answered as honestly as he could. He'd never questioned the pool's location. He'd inherited the property. It never occurred to him that anything was wrong. Then Metz took his turn. Mr. Derek, you've lived in this property for how long? My entire life. 38 years. And you never once thought to verify the property lines? No. Never consulted a survey? No. Your father, who purchased the property in 1978, never mentioned that there was a discrepancy in the surveyed boundary. Derek hesitated. My brother told me that Dad knew about it. But he never told you directly? No. Metz nodded, as if Derek had just confirmed his entire case. So you inherited a property, lived on it for 38 years without questioning the location of the pool, and when your neighbor discovered that the pool sits on her land, you immediately hired a lawyer to prevent her from removing it. Is that a fair summary? We got a lawyer to protect our interests, Derek said carefully. By preventing her from accessing her own property? By preventing escalation while the matter was being resolved. Metz smiled slightly. It was not a kind smile. Nothing further, Your Honor. Karen was called next. She took the stand with the confidence of someone who'd prepared extensively. She testified about discovering the survey discrepancy, about the steps she'd taken to verify it, about her attempts to contact Derek and Michelle about the issue before taking legal action. I tried to be reasonable, she said, and there was something in her voice that made it sound true. I came to their yard and tried to explain the situation. I showed them the survey. I gave them a chance to handle it responsibly. Instead, they got a lawyer and tried to prevent me from accessing my own property. Susan's cross-examination was sharp, but didn't seem to land. Karen had prepared for every question, had an